Unlike the 1997 Constitution with its progressive Bill of Rights that promoted fundamental rights and freedoms, the 2013 Constitution includes regressive limitations on human rights. Above all, the 1997 Constitution entrenched group rights, including land and protective legislations like the Native Land Trust Act for Itaukei landowners and the Agricultural Landlord and Tenant Act for the predominantly Indo-Fijian tenants. More importantly, the independent and constitutional offices were depoliticized under the 1997 Constitution. As identified by the former Chief Justice Anthony Gates in a 2018 appeal ruling, the single national constituency under the 2013 Constitution denies the people direct access to their own elected representatives. A relook at the 2013 Constitution is therefore necessary. As a coalition government, we could be selfish and leave all the clauses that give us unfair advantages and complete power, but we know that would be unfair and unreal and undemocratic. Limiting the fundamental rights of our people is not the legacy that my leadership of the coalition government wants to leave behind. In the pursuit of a just and fair constitution, I am personally committed to the process of the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Truth and reconciliation as a nation is necessary for healing and release for Fiji by permanently ending the dark chapters of political upheavals, the culture of fear and mistrust that plagued our nation. For far too long, we have internalized the hurt and trauma from all our political upheavals and failed to acknowledge the intergenerational burdens we have carried and could pass on. It is time to really listen to each other's recollections of those ugly ordeals and deal with them collectively as a nation. This is a national Talanoa session that we must have with each other. This is the healing that we must embrace. The generations after us who will take Fiji through into the next 50 and even 100 years need us to plant the seeds of healing now. They can then harvest even greater unity when they sit where we sit today as national leaders. I want to read a letter I got after I promised the National Presidential Prayer Breakfast in Washington, after the closing address which I made at that address at the Washington Hilton some years ago. And I promised them that I would return to Fiji and go personally and ask for forgiveness from those that I had offended in my life, especially for my part in the 1987 coup. This man wrote, and I quote, "Dear Mr. Rabuka, I had the opportunity to hear you speak in Washington, D.C. at the National Prayer Breakfast in February. Amidst other testimonies and inspirational reflections on life. I composed this email immediately after, anticipating that at some point I would find a means of getting it to you. Your testimony was extremely powerful to me, as my family was on the receiving end of a bloody military coup in Liberia in 1980, which resulted in the assassination of my grandfather, the late Dr. William R. Tolbert, Jr. It was a powerful testimony because of the uncanny connection that it triggered. I was initially very uncomfortable with your presence at the breakfast and the seemingly warm-hearted reception you received. Why was a coup leader being embraced in such a manner, particularly when acute suffering, tribulations, and possibly loss of life are the resultant effects of a coup leader's actions on a direct segment of the population and sometimes a nation as a whole? I was 9 months old when my grandfather was assassinated, and I visited my mother on my first birthday when she was under house arrest after having been released from prison. Her brother had been made to dig his own grave and was buried alive after being tortured along with other family members and government officials. My grandmother never got over the loss of her firstborn son in such an inhumane manner, never mind her husband, in front of her eyes and a grandson. Congressman Mark Siljander's description in his reaction in A Deadly Misunderstanding to a Muslim at a national prayer breakfast readily came to my mind. He had stormed out of the hall, and I suddenly empathized fully with his reaction. I'm not one easily aroused to judgment based on a multiplicity of factors. I was raised in a multicultural environment in the Ivory Coast, where my family sought refuge. I attended the International Community School of Abidjan and fellowship at International Fellowship of Christians, and had numerous life experiences that have taught me to be open-minded, to embrace diversity, to be accepting of others, and to be tolerant in my concepts and conceptions of the world. Last week in Washington, I was challenged to practice what I preached, but more importantly, I was led to reassess the foundations of my psyche and spirit, and to see whether this structure could withhold such a perceived affront. In an earlier session, I listened as a former Georgian diplomat describe his involvement in a car accident that caused the death of a 16-year-old girl. And while in prison, the mother of the girl, although really affected by the incident, had come to visit with him and brought her two young daughters to meet this man who had caused the death of their older sister. The mother expressed that she did not want her daughters to grow up with hatred in their hearts for him. I immediately flashed back to a discussion with my mother at the age of 6 years old surrounding the assassination of my grandfather. I'm sure that was a difficult and challenging conversation to have with a 6-year-old, particularly since I had expressed hatred for this man who had killed my grandfather. Also an emotion that I think was unbecoming of a 6-year-old. My mother beseeched me not to hate, but rather to love, and implored me not to let bitterness be rooted in my heart. She went a step further, admiringly provided me with a living example with the virtues of love, forgiveness, and reconciliation. So on that evening of Thursday, February the 5th, although my emotion vacillated between a negative place and a positive place, my spiritual foundation of love and forgiveness thrived. Thanks for providing me with the opportunity to question what I ultimately stand for and to allow myself to acknowledge that I too can be an exemplar of love and forgiveness, triumphing over hatred and bitterness. God bless you. Sincerely, Mahavi A. Norman. That was a letter from this man whose grandfather was assassinated. And he hated coups and coup leaders all over the world. I came back after that and took the same tambua with which I was installed as commander back to the commander that I had removed. He was then our president. I took one to the late Rate Pelingan Lau, who was then interim minister for Home Affairs, and called Colonel Jim Sandy, who had just finished the defense review in Fiji. He was in Australia, and then came all the way down to PCC in Vunda, where Ratu Ililo, who had abrogated the Constitution, had come to take up his position as Tuivunda. And while presenting the kamunanga, I know that the Taukei Nakelo normally receives the kamunanga on behalf of the Turanga Tuivunda. At the end of my presentation, Taukei Waragada, Dr. Mavanda's brother, came to receive the kamunanga. I am also passionate about promoting the concept of Pacific as an ocean of peace, and I proposed this at the United Nations General Assembly last year, at various multilateral and regional summits, and to the Great Council of Chiefs. But for me, peace begins at home. That is why Truth and Reconciliation and a relook at the 2013 Constitution are important. From peace, prosperity flows. For me, peace is the absence of fear. This is not a new lesson. Our ancestors who traveled the Pacific Ocean as their highway knew that they could find peaceful welcome when they arrived at our shores. The Girmitia ancestors, despite the horrors of their journey across the Kalapani or Black Waters to get here, recognized peace from the people and of some villages in Tailebu and Novo Rewa when the ship the Syria ran aground on Nasilai reefs. Despite being compartmentalized by our colonial rulers, both communities have lived peacefully together with other ethnicities who have made Fiji their home. Peace has always been available to us to embrace and be led by, but unfortunately, for a long time, politics has been used to shatter peace by using fear. Fear of each other. Fear spurred on by stereotyping. Fear instigated by vicious lies. And fear being whipped up in the relentless pursuit of power. That has and is ending. The use of the race card and fear factor was prevalent during the campaign leading up to the 2022 general elections. I was demonized and accused of many things, even called a snake. Personally, I'm immune to personal insults. Both Justice Jairam Reddy and I, during my tenure as Prime Minister from 1992 to 1999, were subjected to these types of insults. And in 2018-2022, both Professor Biman Prasad and I were subjected to the same kind of gutter-level political verbal abuse. While neither of us was personally bothered, it instilled fear into the minds of the electorates. I could sense this among the Indo-Fijian electorates. They were told we were a threat. They were told that we were a threat to their freedom and security. One of Fiji's greatest leaders, Jairam Reddy, who went on to become a judge of international fame and stature, would not have trusted me or worked with me to usher in a new direction for Fiji if he thought I wasn't honest. Professor Biman Prasad would not have signed a memorandum of understanding on a post-election coalition in government if both he and the National Federation Party didn't trust me. I want to once and for all put an end to fear and doubts about my sincerity as a national leader, particularly to the Indo-Fijian community. Trust me when I say we're here together for Fiji's future. Trust me when I say we are rebuilding Fiji's future together and united as a three-party coalition government, maybe even four parties, or remnants from another party. By the time the People's Coalition government heads to the next elections, we will have a very different electoral landscape compared to the one we endured in the past. Peace begins with us.